make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up, and make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so we are getting back into the Immortal Hulk, and a lot of you guys have been asking for this, but this is because we really kind of let this most recent volume finish before we went back and covered it. So we're kind of covering the whole volume now, right? So this, the traditional volume type stories that we do kind of off and on. You know, sometimes we do single issues, sometimes we do whole volumes. It kind of depends on how I feel about it. But this story is particularly interesting, right? Because I wouldn't say that this takes a break away from the kind of angels and demons, devil, you know, one below all sort of situation that we've had before. This really shines a light more on the direction that the Immortal Hulk is going in, at least for right now anyway, right? Like really focuses more on Banner and focuses on the Immortal Hulk. And the reason why that's important is because Al Ewing really likes to kind of start his stories off with a bang, right? For example, for those of you guys who read Ultimates by Al Ewing, the first story arc was turning Galactus into the Lifebringer, right? So it was like totally shifting Galactus up, and it was like, okay, that's cool, right? And then you start to go into the more of like the meat and potatoes. Let's build this up. Let's kind of focus on the character. With the Ultimates, I would go as far as to say that was a series of comics that was only ever going to be short-lived, right? Because when you look at it, a lot of people weren't really buying it, so it wasn't really like it was going to be lasting for like 100 issues or something along those lines. And the other thing is to kind of build on stuff, right? So with the Incredible Hulk, really with the Hulk himself, he's like a timeless character, right? So Al Ewing's run would last a lot longer than it would with the Ultimates, and so that's why you see him really delving a little more into the human side of things. But to kind of get into this, right, to kind of have this discussion, what this does is it initially focuses on essentially Bruce Banner inciting revolution. And it's kind of cool, right? You know, because what he does here is he kind of makes this speech to humanity, more or less, kind of like this sort of pirate speech where he basically is in a location. Of course, we know it's in Shadow Base, and he even says he's in Shadow Base, but doesn't really tell anybody where he is, right? He's just kind of like, this is a place that I'm at, and then kind of broadcast this message. Now, the overall message is sort of peppered in over the course of this story, but we can kind of consolidate it all at the beginning of this video, and it's one of the coolest things, right? Because basically what he says is the world that we live in, the human world, as you guys call it, basically sucks. And this is kind of a big moment because what it is this Bruce Banner kind of walking away from like the human side of himself and kind of focusing on the fact that he is in fact a Hulk, right? That's what he is. You know, he and the Incredible Hulk are part and parcel. And it's interesting to see that because we've always kind of seen this scenario where Bruce Banner hates the Incredible Hulk side of himself, right? But in this instance, he's kind of welcoming it in, right? He's kind of, you know, being like, this is who I am now. But what he does is he really kind of illustrates this is an organization that was funded by the federal government with a budget of $1.2 billion. And that money could have gone to education. That money could have gone to any number of things that could have made the world a better place. But instead, the government decided to use that money to basically track me down and track down people like me and then try to harvest me and make other versions of me for their own personal use, right? To basically use gamma radiation to make their own personal army. And he starts to go into these interesting scenarios, right? He starts to talk about how what you have in the United States at the moment is basically a kind of system that exists where you have exceedingly vastly, exceedingly powerful people amassing great quantities of wealth for themselves and then just kind of leaving everybody else out there to, sort of high and dry. But the funny thing about this is he doesn't really let the American people get away with playing the victim, right? You know, where the American people would look at this and they would nod their head and say, yeah, he's right, man. They really are letting us, they really are screwing us over. Instead, he kind of turns the table on them and then says, okay, so like, what have you done about it, right? Like, if this is the kind of country you live in, then what have you done to fix it? And then that's when you hear crickets, right? That's when you see empty pockets because it's kind of like, well, I mean, like you guys have all these complaints about how like Amazon never pays taxes. So why are you still buying products off the website, right? Like, it's one of these things where he kind of points the finger at people and says, look, like the issue that you have is doing things changes things. Doing nothing keeps things exactly as they are, but you're lazy. You're comfortable, right? And because you're comfortable, you don't really see a reason to change things. You don't want to change the status quo because it means life would be uncomfortable. So all you're going to do is reduce yourself to posting on Reddit forums or, making Reddit posts and doing Twitter hashtags. And that's the extent of your involvement. Now from there, it jumps into a conversation he has with Amadeus Cho. And the response to this is what's kind of cool about this is while the message of Bruce Banner is one where it's kind of like, okay, this is a little heavy-handed, basically telling the American people, if you want to change things, then quit being lazy and do something about it. They do, right? They start to respond. And that's really kind of what you needed, right? You kind of needed a scenario where you needed somebody to get out there and give people a swift kick in the ass, right? And just be like, you're the source of your own problems. Everything wrong with the country comes down to you, right? You're the one that votes for people. You're the one that buys companies' products. It really is all your fault. So if you want to change things, do something about it. And people are responding, right? And it's kind of a cool thing because, initially Amadeus Cho is kind of like, okay, I'm on the fence about this a little bit, right? Like I'm on the fence about this whole thing because I don't really know how I feel about this. One, what you're doing is resonating with people, but two, you're inciting revolution. And usually whenever people revolt, people get stupid, right? Because people revolt based on their emotions in the moment, right? Like this is bad, so let's do something about it. Okay, cool. Let's execute the kings. He's kind of like, people are highly emotional individuals, right? When people get highly emotional, logic goes out the window. And so yes, you're getting people to act, but you're getting them to act emotionally. You're not getting them to act logically and reasonably. But at the end of the day, that doesn't really seem to be a concern, right? You basically have people who are just kind of spray painting on walls. We believe in Bruce Banner. You have this idea of people who are basically using these outfits, that basically helps them to kind of deal with tear gas, who are yelling like Hulk smash, and then just like grabbing tear gas canisters, throwing them back at the governments that launched them at them in the first place. You have like a full scale revolt on your hands. But one of the things that you see here, in addition to rioting, is you also see what's called Rock's News. Now, Rock's News is where we start to really get into the kind of meat and potatoes of this, right? Because you've got like DJs, right? These sort of political pundits who are like, hey everyone, we should all do something. And by all of us, I mean you. I'm just gonna stay here behind my radio and just talk. That's what I'm going to do. And it's interesting because you kind of keep getting like these Rock's News blips, right? These Rocks on news corporations, these Rocks on things, where it's always this idea of like the country's going to pot, things are going to pieces, the Hulk is bad, so on and so forth. Everything's kind of going nuts. And so what you end up having is you end up having Amadeus Cho, who kind of almost sort of washes his hands and says, look, man, I get where you're coming from, I get what you're trying to do, but this kind of situation never really ends well. And then Namor the Submariner steps in, right? He was just kind of there overhearing things, and Bruce Banner was aware of his presence and was really kind of like, thanks, man, for not stepping up here while Amadeus Cho is here, because he would assume that we're working together. And you end up getting, Namor, who kind of offers a couple bits of wisdom, but we don't really get an exact specification for what that is. Basically, what we get is we end up getting Bruce Banner basically saying, like, if these companies and this world around us doesn't really want to change, right? If these companies can do what they can do because there's no consequences, right? Because they've purchased politicians, they kind of, pay those politicians to ensure nothing really happens, because you guys aren't going to do anything, then we will, right? Like, then basically I'm going to start like the first strike in a war, right? It's basically the Hulk revolution. The Incredible Hulk initiates a revolt in the United States. And it's kind of crazy because when all that happens, then suddenly you switch over to Dario Agra. Now, the reason why Dario Agra is doing this, and this is kind of an important thing, Dario Agra was introduced as part of Jason Aaron's run basically on Thor, right? Thor God of Thunder, issue number 19, I think it was. And Dario Agra is the head of, he's the CEO of Roxxon Oil, Roxxon Corporation, really. Technically it's Roxxon Energy Corp, but they're a multinational company, right? And they're about as crooked as it gets. If it's slavery, if it's drugs, if it's anything illegal, right? Buying politicians, if it's anything illegal, Roxxon likely has their hand in it. And so what you get here is this sort of coalescing of themes, right? You basically got the shadow base group who are essentially like, okay, look, we're going to send Bruce Banner in, but one of the things to understand about translocation, essentially teleportation, is that it's a very risky maneuver, right? Like, it might be easy for Reed Richards because he's super smart, but for the rest of us, it can be kind of difficult, right? So the fear is that when Bruce Banner teleports to this location, this Roxxon location where he's going to launch his first strike, that he could end up being teleported there as just a giant amorphous blob of like bones and organs and blood and veins and muscle and all that kind of stuff. Or he might make it there in one piece. There's no way to really know. We just got to give it a shot and find out, and hopefully you make it there. Now, because of the fact that the Immortal Hulk is immortal, he would come back, right? He would be fine. But like at the end of the day, even if you could heal from all that, you don't want to go through it because it would suck. At the same time, you have Dario Agra really sort of putting off what's really is this overconfidence, right? This idea that we don't really need to worry about whatever strike Bruce Banner is going to do because the forces we have, the Berserkers, are more than capable of being able to withstand a Hulk. Now, where you have Dario Agra who's talking to his guy, one of his guys, Higgins, and he's kind of like, I'm not really worried about this. I'm not really worried about whatever it is a Hulk's going to do. Whatever attack he launches, it's not going to matter. Everything's going to be fine. The Immortal Hulk shows up here and just starts crushing all these Berserkers. And I don't even mean by like a little bit. I mean by like a lot. Like he's just absolutely, decimating these guys, out there in Oregon. And the reason why that matters is because once Dario Agra is being told what's going on, his response is, what did you say? And that's when we end up learning the significance of all this. That in Oregon, that when it comes to Roxxon Oil Corporation, in order for them to kind of maintain the image that they have, which is a positive one, they essentially influence all forms of media, right? They influence television, they influence newspapers, the whole 9 yards, in terms of their own newspapers they release, their own television shows, their radio jockeys that are kind of bought and paid for, different things like that. Now, at the end of the day, it still doesn't really matter, right? Like the job of the average person is to consider multiple sources of information, not just one. But it is kind of a cool thing because it means that Roxxon has her hands in a lot of propaganda out there. And really the strike or the center in Oregon is really kind of the main hub of it all. That's where all the servers are. That's where all the information gets sent out there from. And so because of that, it's a terrifying prospect for Roxxon, because what it means is that Bruce Banner is true to his word, that he's basically bringing the entire institution crashing down, right? That's the whole idea. It's to kind of incite revolt among people and bring the entire institution crashing down around all of them. And so with that being the case, well, it doesn't really mean like a full and total, destruction of the United States, right? He's not really saying like, let's tear down the government, let's do those kind of, so on and so forth. But the result is that it's kind of leading to, the American people in a lot of ways sort of kind of coming out and saying, yes, we're tired of everything being the way that it is. And so with that being the case, Dario Agra in turn takes the smart approach. And this is the smartest thing that he could have done, right? If the entire idea behind this revolt more or less rests on the shoulders of how people perceive Bruce Banner and the Incredible Hulk, that he's kind of a rallying point, then take away their reason to believe that, right? Like at the end of the day, people believe what they want to believe, but people are also easily swayed and they're easily manipulated, right? That's kind of how people are. Not to sound too cynical about it, but people aren't very intelligent when they operate in groups. And so because of that, it's one of these things where he's like, well, then let's shift the whole thing and turn it into a smear campaign against the Immortal Hulk. That's what we need to do, is basically tarnish the guy's name so nobody will really believe in him, right? If people, if people don't believe in him, then nobody will have a reason to follow him. And so this comes in a multitude of different ways. One of the first people to get hit is Jackie McGee. Now, if you guys recall, Jackie McGee was the one who was really following the Immortal Hulk around in terms of all the events that were going on and kind of documenting them, right? So she could write a paper on it. And what's happening here is when she's writing writing about this kind of revolt that's going on, that she writes it, not from a neutral perspective of like, this is a thing that's happening, the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Instead, she's doing what most members of the media do, which is writing it from a perspective where it's how I see it, right? So she's writing it like, we are being affected and this is bothering us and we should, should we revolt and different things like that. When in reality, the media is not supposed to really be part of society. It's supposed to be removed from society in that way of here's an objective depiction of what's going on, not a, hey guys, look at what's happening that's affecting all of us, right? It's not really supposed to tie into the emotional element of people. Now, tying it into people's emotions makes them want to read about you and watch you, which is why you see things unfolding that way. But with regards to what Jackie's doing, it's kind of flying in the face of what the News Corporation, what they're supposed to be doing. So it's not really Dario Agra kind of intervening. It is, but not necessarily. The other way in which he intervenes is by basically stepping up and releasing these kind of monsters into the city of Phoenix, Arizona. And the reason why is because when this happens, of course, he knows that right off the bat, as soon as that takes place, the Immortal Hulk and all of them are going to respond. And the reason why he knows that is that because when you have Shadowbase who runs up on Bruce Banner and says, hey man, like there's these monsters that showed up in Phoenix, we have to respond. Then his question is why? And it's like, well, because the Avengers are off planet, which they are. They were dealing with Starbrand at the time. The Fantastic Four are off doing their thing, right? The X-Men are totally tied up in Krakoa. They're really not going to worry about it too much. The Champions are currently on the East Coast with no real fast mode of travel to get there, right? So it would take them hours to arrive on the scene, and the Agents of Atlas suck. And so because of that, it's kind of like, all right, like no one can respond except for us. Dario Agra knew this, right? Because he had people in different locations that were feeding him this information. And so launching this attack in Phoenix, Arizona, instead of like San Francisco or Seattle or New York or something along those lines, or even in the middle of the United States, right? So like Kansas or in Missouri or something like that. What this basically meant is that it presents a scenario where they're the only ones that can really get there in time. Enter the actual main campaign itself, that when the Immortal Hulk teleports in, suddenly he's swallowed by one of the monsters. Now, this is where you end up getting the really smart played by Dario. This is where you really kind of learn that as a CEO, he's exceedingly effective, right? Because when this goes down, he's basically swallowed by this monster. The Immortal Hulk is swallowed by this monster and set upon by like all these, different things in there, these bugs and different, organisms and so on and so forth and what have you. But while that's also going on, you've got the rest of the Immortal Hulk team who are essentially showing up and facing off against these various forces and so on. And it's cool to see, right? You've got Rick Jones, who really is more of like a gamma level god now. I don't really know what's going on with him. He's kind of resurrected from the dead, so I guess he's partially alive, but partially dead. I'm not really sure. But he's like floating around, right? Like he looks like Molecule Man or like the Beyonder or like Dr. Manhattan. It's kind of what he looks like, right? Like just showing up using like telekinetic and telepathic gamma powers and like destroying things and so on and so forth. It looks kind of cool. You've also got Doc Samson. You've got Red Harpy or Betty Ross here. But the other thing about this is, again, you get the absorbing Crusher Creel. And that's one of the things that I've been talking about, guys. Crusher Creel, and it's important you guys understand, Crusher Creel is underrated. And it's so good to see somebody using him, right? Like, it's so good to see somebody using Crusher Creel in an interesting way. He doesn't really get a whole lot of screen time here, which is fine. You know, I mean, the story kind of revolves around a lot of different characters, not just him. But Crusher Creel is probably one of the most underappreciated and most dangerous characters in all of Marvel Comics, right? Like, let Wolverine's let his skin get blown off his bones, and then let Crusher Creel walk up to him and just touch him, and then absorb adamantium and become adamantium. Regardless, you basically get Alpha Flight showing up here, right? Like, you get the forces of Puck and Titania, you get Absorbing Man, Crusher Creel, and so it's kind of cool to see here. But at the end of the day, Dario Agra's not super concerned about all this. He is, insofar as it's like, okay, like, this can kind of be a little bit of a struggle for us, but at the end of the day, he's not super freaking out about it. And the reason why is because where you end up having, you know, all these forces who were, you know, taking out these monsters, and they're all done in pretty fast, the Immortal Hulk rips himself out of one of the monsters. And when he does, he unleashes all these smaller monsters all over the entire city of Phoenix, Arizona. And that's exactly what Dario Agra was waiting for. That's exactly what he was hoping for. That by releasing all these monsters who in turn are going to start ripping up, you know, and killing people throughout Phoenix, then it's basically the news which breaks in. Oh my God, man, look at all this stuff that's going on. The Immortal Hulk has unleashed all these monsters across the city of Phoenix. This is his fault. We don't know exactly what's going on here, but it's definitely his fault, right? And people will usually always believe the news if it's what they want to hear. And so because of that, it feeds right into what it is that Dario Agra is shooting for. And then he basically says, we have our final person coming in to discredit the Immortal Hulk, kind of going towards this idea of getting rid of the Immortal Hulk and replacing the Hulk with basically an agent of their own. We end up getting Zimnu or Zenmu or whatever it is. People call him the original Hulk. He's not. He's just like a criminal from his own world who like was called a Hulk at one point, right? But like, not really. That's like saying the original Human Torch, Jim Hammond, is like the Human Torch. Not really. It's Johnny Storm. You know, that's really kind of what it is. But nonetheless, it's interesting. We're gonna see like a giant furry guy who's got hypnotic eyes and he's really smart. We're gonna see him fight, you know, face off against the Immortal Hulk. It's cool, I guess. But nonetheless, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace. Okay, I want to give a shout out to Kyle B, David Joseph, Ben, John H, AJ, Matt N, Jeff R, John H, Lean and Mean, which is an awesome name, Jason C, Austin S, Austin H, Joey M, Steven Z, Austin B, Adam K, and Genosis 916. Remember guys, you can send me messages and I'll run off whatever your message is at the end of the video, so long as there's nothing crazy. But if you want to put a message in there, send me an email, rob@robertjefferson.com, and if you are one of these people who gets shout outs, then I will tack it in there. And yeah, thanks for watching guys.